Before we dive in, I've got a quick question for you. Where are you watching from right now, and what time is it? Drop it in the comments. I love seeing how far and wide our viewers are tuning in. Now, imagine this. Rimuru Tempest, the adaptive, suddenly enters the invincible universe. What happens next? Let's find out. There is no summoning circle, no blessing from a god, no prophecy whispered into the wind. Rimuru Tempest appears the way disasters do in this universe, without warning. One second there's empty air above a ruined city block. The next, reality ripples, and a lone figure stands amid drifting ash and twisted steel. Sirens scream in the distance. Buildings burn. Somewhere nearby, people are crying for help, but no hero arrives to answer them. Rimuru pauses, eyes scanning the scene. Great Sage already feeding him information at impossible speed. This world's atmosphere is familiar, yet wrong. Earth-like gravity, human architecture. But the emotional residue in the air is heavy. Fear, anger, despair layered so thick it almost feels physical. In most worlds Rimuru has visited, destruction is followed by hope. Here, destruction is routine, normal, expected. As he watches emergency crews pull bodies from the rubble, Rimuru realizes something unsettling. This devastation wasn't caused by villains alone. It was the aftermath of a hero fight. Two godlike beings clashed above a city, and the city lost. No barriers, no evacuation spells. No one is strong enough to stop it from happening in the first place. Rimuru's expression tightens, not in rage, but in quiet concern. This is a world where power exists in abundance, yet responsibility is optional. Great Sage finishes its analysis. This universe operates on brutal efficiency. Strength determines survival. Collateral damage is accepted as the price of protection. Rimuru has seen cruel worlds before, but this one is different. There's no demon lord ruling from the shadows, no dark god pulling strings. The cruelty here is systemic, baked into the very idea of what it means to be a hero. As a caped figure streaks across the sky in the distance, chasing something far stronger than the people below, Rimuru understands the core problem immediately. This world doesn't lack saviors, it lacks control. And for the first time since his arrival, Rimuru Tempest asks a dangerous question, one that this universe is not ready to answer. What happens when someone with god-tier power refuses to accept that's just how things are? Rimuru moves at last, but not toward the smoke-filled sky where battles rage. He walks into the streets, slow, deliberate, stepping past shattered glass and overturned cars. People notice him only when he's already close. A few back away, mistaking him for another superpowered threat. Others don't even look up, too exhausted to care. That reaction unsettles him more than hostility ever could. In his experience, fear is loud. Here, it's quiet, resigned. Like the world has learned that panic changes nothing. A sudden shockwave tears through the avenue, strong enough to buckle asphalt. Somewhere above, a fight escalates. Rimuru raises a hand instinctively, not to attack, but to calculate. The energy output alone is staggering, raw, uncontrolled, wasteful. He watches as a falling chunk of debris hurtles toward a group of civilians frozen in place. Before anyone else can react, space bends. The rubble dissolves midair, absorbed and neutralized so cleanly it leaves nothing but drifting dust. No explosion, no flash, just absence. The people stare, stunned, unsure whether to run or thank him. Rimuru doesn't speak. He's listening. To the data flooding in, to the screams fading into uneasy silence, to the structure of this world revealing itself layer by layer. Heroes here react. They don't prevent it. They don't stabilize. They arrive late, hit hard, and leave the mess behind for someone else to clean. In Tempest, power was a tool to build systems, laws, alliances, safeguards. Here, power is an event, something that happens to people, not for them. High above, a figure slows mid-flight, eyes narrowing. Someone has noticed. Sensors spike. Unregistered energy signatures trigger alarms deep within underground facilities. Rimuru feels the attention settle on him like a spotlight. This world watches first and asks questions later. He straightens, unbothered. If they see him as a threat, so be it. Threats, at least, are taken seriously. Great Sage flags multiple anomalies converging. Heroes, government agents, satellites adjusting their focus. Rimuru exhales softly. First contact is inevitable now. But as he looks at the cracked streets and frightened faces around him, one truth settles firmly in his mind. If he does nothing, this world will keep breaking itself apart. And if he acts, he may become the most disruptive force it has ever known. In a universe built on unchecked strength, Rimuru Tempest has arrived with something far more dangerous than raw power. He has intent. The sky darkens, not from clouds, but from presence. Something fast cuts through the atmosphere, creating a sonic crack that ripples across the city. Rimuru looks up just in time to see a red and blue blur halt midair, hovering with visible caution. Invincible. Young, powerful, and already carrying the weight of a world that keeps demanding more than he can give. Mark Grayson studies the strange figure below him, senses screaming that this is not someone he can rush head first. Rimuru meets his gaze calmly, curiosity reflecting back at him rather than hostility. Before either of them can speak, the ground trembles again. Another impact nearby. Another fight spilling into civilian space. Rimuru doesn't wait this time. He vanishes, reappearing miles away in an instant, just as two titans collide through a skyscraper's upper floors. The building begins to fold in on itself. Rimuru raises both hands, and for a brief moment the laws of this universe hesitate. Floors stabilize. Stress fractures reverse. Gravity itself seems to cooperate. The collapse stops. People trapped inside stare in disbelief as the building holds, saved not by heroics, but by precision. Invincible arrives seconds later, eyes wide. He's seen Adam Eve rebuild matter, seen Viltrumites punch mountains apart. But this is different. There's no strain, no effort, just complete authority over the situation. Rimuru turns to him, finally speaking, voice calm and almost gentle. He asks a simple question. Does this happen often? Mark doesn't know how to answer because, yes, it does. All the time. And no one ever asks it like that. From orbit, a man with decades of experience in managing superhuman disasters watches the footage roll in. Cecil Stedman rewinds the clip, frame by frame, jaw tightening. Unknown entity. Reality warping capabilities. No visible energy discharge. No aggression. That's what worries him most. In this world, predictable monsters are easier to handle than benevolent gods. Orders are issued. Observation first. Containment plans drafted that everyone knows will never be enough. Rimuru senses the scrutiny, but doesn't resist it. His focus is elsewhere, on the pattern forming in his mind. Viltrumite-level entities. Human governments are forced into reactionary roles. Heroes stretched thin, acting as damage control rather than guardians. This world isn't failing because its people are weak. It's failing because its strongest forces were never designed to protect, only to endure. As emergency crews rush in, Mark hovers beside Rimuru, conflicted. He should be interrogating him, detaining him, doing something heroic. Instead, he finds himself asking for help, quietly, almost ashamed. Rimuru listens, really listens, and for a moment the chaos fades. If this universe is a battlefield, then Rimuru Tempest has just stepped onto it as something entirely new. Not a conqueror, not a savior, but a solution the world never planned for. Rimuru watches the rescue unfold with a strange sense of distance. Humans are pulled from wreckage, medics shouting, helicopters cutting through smoke, but he can already see the inefficiencies, the delays, the lives lost in the seconds between impact and response. Great Sage compiles probabilities with brutal honesty, and Rimuru silences half of them before they finish. Not because they're wrong, but because this world has normalized numbers where lives should be. Above the city, something far heavier descends. The air itself seems to tense, as if bracing. Omni-Man lands with controlled force, eyes locked on Rimuru from the instant his boots touch the ground. No words, no theatrics, just an assessment. Predator meeting unknown prey. Rimuru turns slowly to face him, immediately recognizing the threat, not from power alone, but from intent buried deep beneath a practiced smile. Great Sage floods him with data. Viltrumite physiology, density, regenerative capacity, combat instincts refined through conquest, a species that doesn't protect worlds. It breaks them until they kneel. Omni-Man speaks at last, voice calm, authoritative, rehearsed. He asks what Rimuru is. Not who, what. Rimuru answers honestly. A former human, a monster by definition, a ruler by circumstance. He senses the shift the moment those words land. To Omni-Man, this isn't a hero or an ally. It's a variable, one that doesn't belong in the long game he's been playing for decades. The tension tightens. Invincible hovers nearby, torn between instinct and trust, feeling something is terribly wrong but unable to name it yet. Omni-Man steps forward, testing boundaries, testing reactions. Rimuru doesn't move. He doesn't need to. He's already mapping outcomes, thousands of them, each branching from a single decision. Fight now, and this city becomes a crater. Restrain him, and the truth comes too early. Let him go, and the shadow over this world remains. Rimuru chooses a fourth option. He allows Omni-Man to feel it, just for an instant. A pressure, vast and incomprehensible, brushing against Nolan's senses like the edge of an abyss. Not an attack, a warning. Omni-Man's eyes narrow, something unfamiliar flickering behind them. Caution. The briefest hint of uncertainty. Rimuru smiles politely, almost apologetically, and steps back, dissolving into motion as reality folds around him. When the pressure vanishes, the city breathes again. Omni-Man says nothing, but the balance has shifted. Somewhere deep in space, forces far beyond Earth begin to take notice. Because a universe built on domination has just encountered something it was never meant to face. And this was only Rimuru's first step into a world without mercy. Rimuru doesn't disappear to hide. He withdraws to observe. High above the planet, suspended in a pocket of space that shouldn't exist, he watches Earth like a living system under stress. Cities pulse with activity. Military networks hum with tension. Satellites track every unusual fluctuation in energy, and all of them keep circling back to the same conclusion: him. Rimuru feels the weight of their attention and allows it. If this world insists on reacting to power, then it needs to understand what kind of power it's dealing with. The response comes swiftly and predictably. A controlled location, a diplomatic pretext. Cecil Stedman doesn't believe in coincidences, and he certainly doesn't believe in benevolent strangers with godlike abilities. When Rimuru agrees to appear at a remote GDA facility, the decision sends shockwaves through every hero channel on the planet. Some see it as a chance to negotiate. Others see it as a trap waiting for spring. Rimuru arrives unarmed, unarmored, and completely unconcerned, materializing inside the facility without setting off a single alarm. That alone rattles them more than any show of force could have. Invincible is there, along with a handful of Earth's strongest defenders. The atmosphere is thick with unspoken rules. Don't escalate, don't blink first, don't let him know how nervous you are. Rimuru greets them politely, almost casually, as if they're meeting under ordinary circumstances. He asks about their system, how heroes are deployed, how damage is assessed, how responsibility is assigned when cities are destroyed in the name of protection. The questions land awkwardly. No one here is used to being asked why things are broken, only how fast they can be patched. Tension spikes when a simulated containment protocol activates without warning. Not Cecil's idea. Someone panicked. Energy fields slam down, weapons charge, contingency plans roll into motion. Rimuru doesn't react with anger. He reacts with disappointment. In a single breath, he disassembles the entire system. Not violently, but conceptually, rewriting its function so the fields dissolve into the harmless light. The heroes freeze, because in that moment they realize something chilling. Rimuru isn't just stronger than them, he understands their world better than they do. And this is only the beginning of first contact. The room doesn't erupt into chaos. It sinks into silence. Monitors flicker back to life, systems reporting green across the board as if nothing ever went wrong. Cecil's voice finally cuts in over the intercom, controlled but edged with strain. He apologizes not for the trap but for the fear that caused it. Rimuru accepts the apology without comment, already aware that trust in this world is measured in layers, not absolutes. What follows isn't a negotiation, it's an autopsy. Rimuru listens as Earth's defenders explain their structure, how heroes are dispatched after incidents occur, how risk is calculated, how casualties are weighed against stopping larger threats. The logic is familiar, almost comforting in its order, until Rimuru points out the flaw. Their system assumes loss is inevitable. Built into every response is the quiet agreement that some lives simply won't be saved. The room grows tense. No one argues because no one can. A call interrupts the discussion, a crisis unfolding in real time. A superhuman conflict escalating over a coastal city, already tearing through infrastructure faster than evacuation teams can move. Instinct kicks in. The heroes turn to leave. Rimuru stands with them, but he doesn't rush. He asks permission. The question catches everyone off guard. Permission isn't something gods ask for. Cecil hesitates only a moment before giving it, knowing full well he can't stop what comes next anyway. They arrive to devastation in progress. Shockwaves rip through the skyline as two combatants clash midair, unconcerned with the lives below. Rimuru observes for less than a second before acting. He doesn't attack either fighter. Instead, the battlefield itself changes. Air pressure stabilizes. Shockwaves dampen. Falling debris disintegrates before impact. The city stops dying. The combatants falter, confused, suddenly fighting in a world that refuses to break for them. The heroes watch in disbelief. This isn't combat, it's containment. A complete rewrite of cause and effect designed around one priority: civilians first. Invincible realizes with a sinking clarity that everything he's been taught about heroism is reactive by design. Rimuru's approach isn't faster, it's earlier. By the time fists are thrown, he's already prevented the consequences. When the conflict ends, not with a knockout but with enforced separation, the message is clear. Rimuru isn't here to replace Earth's heroes. He's here to expose the cracks they've been standing on all along. Back at the facility, the footage is replayed from a dozen angles. Slow motion, thermal overlays, energy scans pushed to their limits. Every frame tells the same impossible story. Rimuru didn't overpower the combatants, didn't neutralize them through brute force. He removed their impact. Cecil leans back in his chair, fingers steepled, realizing the nightmare scenario isn't Rimuru turning hostile. It's Rimuru deciding Earth's current system is obsolete. The heroes feel it too. Adam Eve stares at the data longer than anyone else, recognizing something uncomfortably close to her own abilities, but refined to a degree she can't even conceptualize. This isn't raw potential, it's mastery. Black Samson voices what the rest are thinking. If someone like Rimuru had been here years ago, how many cities would still be standing? How many names would never have made it onto memorial walls? The question hangs heavy, unanswered. Rimuru doesn't gloat, he doesn't lecture. He simply explains his logic. Power without structure leads to chaos. Structure without compassion leads to cruelty. This world, he observes, has leaned too hard on the idea that heroes can fix problems after they explode. That belief has shaped everything, from military doctrine to public expectation. Heroes are symbols, not solutions. Rimuru isn't interested in symbols. He's interested in outcomes. Another interruption. This time quieter, more dangerous. A Viltrumite-level energy signature brushes the edge of Earth's sensors and disappears. Rimuru notices it immediately. Cecil does too, though he can't place why his instincts are screaming. Rimuru says nothing, but his attention shifts, mind racing through possibilities. Someone is watching. Not with curiosity, but with calculation. Invincible approaches him privately, voice low. He asks the question that's been building since their first meeting. Are you going to take over? Rimuru considers it seriously, and that honesty terrifies Mark more than a lie would have. Rimuru answers that he doesn't want Earth. He wants it to stop breaking itself. If that requires change, then change will come, whether people are ready or not. As the segment ends, the realization settles in across the room. First contact didn't fail. It succeeded too well. Earth's heroes have met someone who doesn't need them to fight harder, only to rethink everything they stand for. And somewhere beyond the stars, forces that rule through domination have begun to recognize Rimuru Tempest as a variable that should never have been allowed to exist. Cecil doesn't call it an alliance. He calls it a window. Limited access, constant surveillance, and a long list of contingency plans that everyone in the room understands are more comforting than effective. Rimuru agrees without resistance. Control, after all, is a two-way illusion. If observing him helps this world feel safer, he sees no harm in allowing it. What matters is what happens next. The public reaction is immediate and divided. Footage leaks, as it always does. A mysterious figure halting a superhuman disaster without throwing a single punch. Commentators argue over whether Rimuru is a savior, a weapon, or something far worse. Protesters demand answers. Others demand he stay forever. Rimuru watches the debate unfold with quiet interest. Worlds rarely know what to do with beings who solve problems too cleanly. Conflict gives people someone to blame. Stability forces them to look inward. Behind closed doors, heroes struggle with something far more personal: their identity. For years, they've measured success by survival rates and minimized destruction. Now they've seen a standard that doesn't accept either as good enough. Some resent it. Others are inspired by it. Invincible falls into the second camp, asking questions late into the night about foresight, about systems, about whether heroism has to be reactive at all. Rimuru answers patiently, not as a mentor, but as a mirror. Then the silence breaks. Deep space sensors register movement. Faint at first, then unmistakable. Patterns consistent with Viltrumite reconnaissance. Cecil receives the report with a sinking feeling. Earth has never been this visible before. Rimuru closes his eyes. Great Sage already mapping trajectories that stretch far beyond the solar system. This was inevitable. A universe built on conquest doesn't ignore disruption. It eliminates it. Rimuru finally voices what he's been holding back since the moment he arrived. Earth is not ready for what's coming. Not because it lacks strength, but because it lacks unity. Heroes act alone. Nations act in fear. Viltrumites exploit both. If this world survives, it won't be through louder punches or bigger explosions. It will be through coordination enforced by overwhelming authority. The room goes still as the implication settles in. Rimuru isn't threatening them. He's offering preparation, a chance to evolve before extinction becomes the only teacher left. And as Earth's heroes stare at the future bearing down on them, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. First contact didn't just change how they fight. It changed who holds the line when the universe finally comes knocking. Rimuru Tempest had already begun to understand Earth in ways its own defenders could not, but nothing in his experience prepared him for the threat that was slowly revealing itself above the planet. A threat born not of chaos but of calculation, discipline, and unrelenting dominance. The Viltrumites. A race that measured worth in survival, power, and the capacity to conquer worlds. Great Sage processed their combat patterns, regenerative abilities, flight speeds, and the sheer lethality packed into every one of their cells. If Rimuru had arrived on Earth to bring stability, the Viltrumites were already arriving to challenge it, and the stakes could not have been higher. The first indication of their presence wasn't a roar or a crash. It was absent. Communications went silent in sectors Rimuru had been monitoring. Satellites dropping out of orbit as though someone had reached in and unplugged them. Then came the movement, a speck in the sky. Barely noticeable, yet traveling at a speed that bent perception itself. Rimuru adjusted his calculations, predicting not just the path, but the impact it would have if it collided with anything in its trajectory. It was an instinct honed over countless battles, and yet even he felt a trace of unease. Viltrumites were not just strong, they were relentless, and their first contact was rarely measured in negotiation. Nolan, Omni-Man, made his appearance known the moment the signature spiked. Rimuru had already anticipated it, standing atop the edge of a cliff overlooking a city still scarred from earlier conflicts. Nolan's descent was methodical, controlled, radiating authority and barely suppressed aggression. His eyes locked onto Rimuru, instantly reading a level of power that he had never faced before outside his own kind. For Nolan, power was the ultimate arbiter of truth, and yet here stood a being who seemed to render conventional metrics meaningless. Every movement, every calculated glance spoke of intelligence intertwined with a capability so far beyond mortal comprehension that Omni-Man's usual confidence wavered ever so slightly. The first words spoken were cautious. Omni-Man, calm and measured, asked what Rimuru intended on Earth. Rimuru answered truthfully. He was not here to dominate, not to fight, but to prevent unnecessary loss. The simplicity of the answer unsettled Nolan. In a universe where power dictated right, where Viltrumite law was enforced with violence, moral clarity was a foreign concept. Great Sage whispered calculations of likelihood and survival. Rimuru noted that Nolan's stance alone signaled readiness for battle. The Viltrumite was testing him, feeling for weakness, probing boundaries. Before conflict could erupt, Rimuru took a calculated step forward, demonstrating a fraction of his ability. Not an attack, but a display. A localized temporal dampening around a collapsing bridge, the debris halting mid-air, civilians untouched. No energy blasts, no fist strikes, just control. Nolan's eyes narrowed, instinctively recognizing that Rimuru's power did not just challenge strength. It undermined it conceptually. Here was someone who could end fights before they started, rewrite outcomes in real time, and adapt to any threat with surgical precision. And this was only a glimpse. The encounter escalated when other Viltrumite operatives appeared, drawn to Earth by Rimuru's presence and the signature it emitted. Ships streaked across the sky with terrifying velocity, landing with military precision in areas surrounding major cities. Each Viltrumite scanned for threats, for anomalies, and in their eyes, Rimuru was both a curiosity and a potential threat to the very order they were trained to impose. Omni-Man shifted into defensive posture, but Rimuru's calculations already included him as a variable, not an ally, not an enemy yet, simply a component of the system he was observing. What followed next was a tense dance of ideology and strength. Nolan's approach was direct, the Viltrumite way: overpower, dominate, assert supremacy. Rimuru's response was adaptive, preemptive, and controlled. He avoided unnecessary confrontation but neutralized every calculated threat the moment it appeared. Each Viltrumite found themselves baffled by a force that didn't match their expected profile of aggression. This was not a fight to win in the traditional sense. It was an existential question posed through action. Could a being with no allegiance to conquest impose order on a species that lived by it? As the Viltrumite forces regrouped, Rimuru analyzed potential escalation scenarios at speeds that dwarfed conventional thinking. Attack patterns, regenerative capacities, combined force thresholds, all processed and cataloged in seconds. He began to identify a fundamental vulnerability. The Viltrumite, dependence on their concept of superiority. Their power was immense, but rigid. Their approach is predictable. Every attack, every offensive maneuver, followed centuries of honed instinct and a culture built on domination. Rimuru didn't just see them as threats. He saw a problem with an executable solution if he chose to act. Invincible hovered close to the edge of the battlefield, observing Rimuru with a mix of awe and apprehension. Mark had never witnessed power so absolute, so fluid, and yet so controlled. Every decision Rimuru made carried weight, yet none of it felt arbitrary. It was the difference between raw strength and applied wisdom. Even Nolan began to realize subtly that this was no ordinary opponent. Rimuru was more than a threat to a single Viltrumite or even Earth. He represented a paradigm shift, an intelligence capable of neutralizing a species that had survived millennia precisely because of their physical dominance. The Viltrumites launched their first coordinated strike, expecting a decisive engagement that would assert their supremacy. Rimuru anticipated it instantly. He didn't counter with destruction. Instead, he reframed the battlefield. Environmental factors, kinetic energy, structural stability, all were adjusted in real time. The Viltrumites' first offensive, meant to break him, ended up isolated, harmless, and strategically irrelevant. Even Omni-Man took a step back, recognizing that the rules of engagement had changed. Here was a being who didn't just survive confrontation. He controlled the very definition of conflict itself. As the dust settled, Rimuru didn't gloat. He didn't assert dominance. He simply observed the Viltrumites recalibrating, analyzing patterns he had already mapped. The calculation was simple. If they escalated, the damage would be catastrophic, but Rimuru had contingencies for every conceivable outcome. More importantly, he began to teach the heroes of Earth without words, through example, restraint, and calculated action. What the Viltrumites saw as a test of power, Rimuru reframed it as a lesson in adaptability, in foresight, and in the terrifying clarity of a being who could not be matched in conventional combat. The first contact with the Viltrumites ended not in victory or defeat, but in understanding, an uneasy truce enforced by mutual recognition of capability. Rimuru Tempest had entered the invincible universe, and the very concept of strength was being rewritten in real time. Earth's defenders were left to grapple with their new reality. That the most dangerous force they had ever faced wasn't a Viltrumite or even an enemy, but a creature who could think, adapt, and evolve faster than anyone could anticipate. Rimuru's presence alone had already caused subtle ripples across the Viltrumite ranks. Each operative recalculated their approach, not out of fear, but out of disciplined logic. They had faced planets full of resistance before, and yet nothing had ever adapted so fluidly, so preemptively to their strategies. Every attack they had considered, every approach they had rehearsed for centuries, now risked being rendered irrelevant before it even began. Rimuru wasn't just another combatant. He was an unpredictable variable introduced into a system that thrived on predictability. Omni-Man hovered above, analyzing Rimuru's movements, trying to anticipate his next action, but the task was impossible. Every step, every gesture, every tiny adjustment in posture contained layers of computation that Nolan couldn't hope to read in real time. This wasn't just power. It was intelligence applied at speeds far beyond Viltrumite capability. Rimuru was observing the environment, the heroes, and the Viltrumites simultaneously, calculating outcomes and countermeasures with precision that was almost surgical. To Nolan, this was unsettling. A force that didn't rely on brute strength alone, but could manipulate the very battlefield, enforce order, and neutralize threats without even touching them? That was beyond any Viltrumite training or expectation. The first skirmish erupted unexpectedly. A Viltrumite operative attempted to isolate Invincible, striking with brutal velocity, aiming to test both father and son simultaneously. Rimuru didn't intervene with raw force. Instead, he used subtle manipulations, kinetic dampening, localized gravity shifts, and environmental restructuring to redirect the attack, ensuring that no civilians were harmed. The Viltrumites' blow landed on air, collapsing a nearby street into nothingness that wasn't destructive but effectively neutralized. The operative blinked in disbelief. This wasn't a fight. It was a lesson in futility. Invincible, watching closely, began to understand the depth of Rimuru's strategy. Here was a being who didn't need to overpower opponents to win. He neutralized consequences, minimized collateral damage, and enforced control without aggression. Mark could see the logic now. Rimuru didn't just win battles. He prevented them from ever becoming lethal. That level of efficiency was terrifying, not because it was destructive, but because it rendered conventional heroics almost meaningless. The Viltrumites regrouped, realizing they were facing an adversary unlike any other. Nolan's voice cut through the chaos, commanding his allies with authority. But even his orders felt almost ceremonial. Rimuru anticipated their movements, predicting attack vectors and compensating instantly. For every strike they considered, a countermeasure appeared, not as retaliation, but as a natural consequence of his calculations. Their world of domination and physical superiority clashed with a force that operated on rules they could not perceive. Rimuru turned his attention briefly to Earth's heroes. Adam Eve, Robot, and the others watched in awe as he adapted in real time, effectively controlling the battlefield while keeping them safe. Every hero present gained an unspoken lesson. Power alone was not enough. Strategy, adaptation, and foresight could neutralize threats even stronger than anything they had ever faced. This was a paradigm they had never truly considered. Omni-Man attempted to escalate, pushing Rimuru to respond directly to his aggression. A series of rapid blows, each capable of shattering the city below, were exchanged. But Rimuru didn't match them with brute force. Instead, he redirected energy, dissolved momentum, and subtly altered the environment to render attacks harmless. Nolan realized with a sinking certainty that Rimuru could control engagements without lifting a hand in offense. And that realization shook the very foundation of what he considered unbeatable. By the time the first confrontation ended, both Viltrumites and Earth's heroes were forced to recalibrate their understanding of what power truly meant. Rimuru had not destroyed his opponents, yet he had demonstrated superiority in a way that transcended simple physical dominance. He had shown that he could protect civilians, neutralize threats, and command the battlefield without ever committing an act of unnecessary violence. The Viltrumites, silent and cautious, withdrew temporarily to reconsider their approach. Omni-Man hovered nearby, expression unreadable, processing the uncomfortable truth. Rimuru wasn't just another superpowered being. He was a force of nature that could not be quantified by strength or speed alone. And Earth's defenders, witnessing everything firsthand, felt the first stirrings of a terrifying possibility. Their world, as brutal and dangerous as it was, might not survive the next encounter unless they embraced a level of strategy and coordination that Rimuru had already mastered. The Viltrumites returned, this time with calculated precision. Their approach synchronized as if each strike were choreographed over centuries. Nolan's eyes were cold, the unmistakable steel of a warrior who had never known defeat flashing in their depths. Rimuru, standing calmly atop a crumbling skyscraper, didn't flinch. He could feel the collective power radiating from the group, an almost unbearable pressure that would have crushed ordinary beings. Yet he analyzed it without hesitation, great sage running simulations that unfolded hundreds of steps ahead. Every movement the Viltrumites considered, every strike they prepared, had already been accounted for, every possible consequence neutralized before it could manifest. Invincible hovered just out of Rimuru's line of sight, trying to process what he was witnessing. Mark had faced overwhelming enemies before, from Viltrumite enforcers to planetary threats, but nothing had prepared him for this. Rimuru wasn't just reacting to attacks, he was preempting them, altering the battlefield subtly, restructuring the flow of energy and momentum, and neutralizing danger in ways that seemed almost miraculous. Even the Viltrumites, trained and bred for domination, began to hesitate. Their usual certainty cracked under the weight of Rimuru's adaptive presence. They had never encountered an opponent who could render their centuries of honed instinct meaningless in real time. The first real engagement began when a Viltrumite operative aimed to isolate Invincible, launching at speeds that fractured the sound barrier. Rimuru didn't intercept directly. Instead, he manipulated the air and structural elements around the approaching threat, redirecting the momentum so the strike harmlessly collided with a distant tower, collapsing it safely into rubble where no civilians were present. The operative skidded to a halt, eyes widening, as the concept of an enemy who controlled outcomes rather than physically confronting them sank in. He had expected conflict, but what he faced was something else entirely: inevitability. Omni-Man's frustration was evident. He shifted into a series of rapid, punishing attacks, each one capable of leveling whole city blocks. Rimuru didn't retaliate with brute force. He manipulated gravitational fields, redistributed kinetic energy, and subtly reinforced the environment to absorb and redirect every blow. It wasn't just defensive, it was absolute control. Nolan's eyes narrowed as he realized that Rimuru's superiority didn't come from raw power, but from the ability to enforce the rules of engagement themselves. No Viltrumite, no matter how disciplined, could predict or dominate him within conventional parameters. Earth's heroes watched from the sidelines, their own understanding of combat and strategy challenged to the core. Adam Eve's mouth hung slightly open as she realized that Rimuru's actions weren't just powerful, they were teaching. Every subtle adjustment he made to the battlefield conveyed principles far beyond their usual experience: anticipation, mitigation, restraint, and optimization. It was a form of strategy that transcended typical heroics. Mark felt the uncomfortable truth: his father's strength, the Viltrumite way, and even the collective power of Earth's defenders might never be enough against an adaptive mind capable of outmaneuvering and neutralizing raw force at will. The Viltrumites, regrouping in midair, recognized the futility of continuing the initial engagement. Their training demanded action, yet their instincts screamed that conventional tactics would fail. Rimuru didn't need to force their retreat. They withdrew because they understood instinctively that attacking further would be wasteful. Even Omni-Man, prideful and uncompromising, hovered tensely, recalculating the risk with every passing second. Rimuru had introduced a new variable into the Viltrumite calculus, and variables like him were anomalies the Empire had never encountered. As the dust settled, Rimuru shifted his focus back to Earth's defenders. Invincible floated closer, voice tight as he asked the question that had been forming since the first clash. "Are you going to fight them?" Rimuru's calm answer unsettled him. Not if it's unnecessary. His objective was not conquest or conflict, but the preservation of life and the prevention of chaos. A philosophy alien to a universe defined by survival of the strongest. That simple statement reframed the entire battlefield. The Viltrumites weren't just potential enemies. They were a problem that could be solved without escalating violence. And Earth's heroes began to understand that their perception of power might need to evolve or be rendered obsolete. By the end of this encounter, a tense but undeniable truth emerged. Rimuru Tempest was no ordinary threat, no conventional hero, and certainly no typical opponent for the Viltrumites. He had demonstrated the ability to neutralize, manipulate, and control conflicts at a level that defied expectation. The world's defenders were left with a profound realization. Their standard measures of power, skill, and strategy were no longer sufficient. Something had changed. The Viltrumites themselves, proud and unyielding, had to acknowledge a force that could not be confronted by strength alone. Rimuru had arrived, and with him, the very rules of engagement for Earth, and perhaps the universe, had begun to change. The Viltrumites didn't retreat far. They hovered just beyond the city limits, regrouping with calculated precision, their expressions unreadable, their movements deliberate. Rimuru observed quietly, his form seemingly relaxed but his mind racing at impossible speeds. Great Sage analyzed not just their current positioning, but the psychological patterns ingrained into Viltrumite behavior, discipline, ruthlessness, and the subtle arrogance of a species that has dominated countless worlds. This wasn't just about brute strength. This was a mental calculus spanning generations, and Rimuru understood immediately that defeating them required more than power, it required insight. Omni-Man's posture stiffened. For the first time, Nolan recognized that he might be facing an entity that could surpass even Viltrumite methodology. He had faced armies, planets, and even fellow Viltrumites, but this was different. The way Rimuru anticipated attacks, adjusted outcomes, and controlled situations without striking directly challenged the very foundation of Nolan's worldview. Every action Rimuru took was precise, measured, and deliberate, leaving no room for error. Even the slightest miscalculation on the Viltrumite's part could be exploited instantly, not through aggression, but through efficiency. The next engagement began subtly. A Viltrumite operative broke formation, attempting to flank Rimuru and test his reaction. Before the strike could land, Rimuru manipulated gravitational vectors in the surrounding environment, redirecting the opponent harmlessly away while maintaining civilian safety. Another operative tried to strike Mark directly, expecting to test the young hero's limits. Rimuru intervened not with aggression, but by slightly adjusting the momentum and trajectory of the attack so that Mark was left unharmed, and the Viltrumite's efforts amounted to nothing. In mere moments, Rimuru demonstrated that the Viltrumites' raw power, the very tool they relied on to dominate, could be neutralized conceptually rather than violently. Invincible hovered close, awe and unease warring in his expression. "He doesn't fight like anyone I've ever seen," Mark muttered. He controls outcomes before they even happen." Nolan didn't respond immediately. He was too focused, trying to process the implications. The Viltrumite philosophy had always been simple. Strength dictates victory. Rimuru was rewriting the rules in real time, proving that strength alone could be circumvented by intelligence, adaptability, and absolute control over the battlefield. Rimuru then shifted his attention to the environment, using subtle manipulations to stabilize collapsing structures, redirect debris, and prevent casualties, all while maintaining full awareness of the Viltrumite threats. The heroes and civilians below couldn't understand the mechanics, only the results. Buildings that should have crumbled remained standing. Dangerous attacks fizzled harmlessly, and all of it occurred without Rimuru ever raising his fists. The Viltrumites realized the terrifying truth. They could not overpower him conventionally. Every offensive maneuver was predicted, every strategy countered, and every possible collateral outcome accounted for. Nolan's frustration became palpable. His pride, built over decades of conquest and mastery, bristled against the impossibility of Rimuru's control. He launched a direct assault, aiming to test Rimuru's limits, to provoke a reaction that might reveal a weakness. Rimuru responded not with force, but with precision, dampening kinetic energy, altering momentum, and neutralizing danger in a fraction of a second. The result left Nolan momentarily stunned. He had faced enemies capable of immense destruction, yet none had manipulated combat with this level of effortless dominance. Even the Viltrumites in the sky began to hesitate. Their centuries of training had never prepared them for an opponent who could predict, adapt, and enforce the rules of engagement without the need for aggression. They regrouped, reassessing every possible approach, calculating whether continuing the fight was even feasible. Rimuru, meanwhile, observed calmly, analyzing their thought patterns, movements, and coordination. He wasn't attacking. He was solving a problem, efficiently, thoroughly, and without unnecessary destruction. By the end of this confrontation, a profound shift had occurred. Earth's defenders, once confident in their ability to protect the planet, now understood that the stakes had escalated beyond conventional measures. The Viltrumites, proud and relentless, were forced to acknowledge a new type of adversary, one whose supremacy was not measured in raw strength, but in the absolute mastery of outcomes. Rimuru Tempest had not just faced the Viltrumite problem. He had reframed it entirely, establishing himself as an unpredictable, unavoidable, and utterly dominant variable. In that tense silence, hovering above a city scarred but intact, one truth became undeniable. Rimuru's arrival had changed the game permanently. The Viltrumites, for the first time, had encountered a being whose power could not be countered through force alone. Earth's heroes had seen the future of combat, and even Omni-Man recognized that this was no ordinary adversary. Rimuru Tempest wasn't just powerful, he was absolute. And as the Viltrumites retreated momentarily to reconsider their strategy, the world below and the universe beyond was left to wonder. Could anyone withstand the full scope of a being who controlled not just the battlefield, but the very definition of conflict itself? Rimuru Tempest's arrival on Earth had already rewritten the rules of engagement for its defenders and enemies alike, but the full scale of his presence was only beginning to make itself felt. The Viltrumite threat, once looming as an almost unstoppable force, now faced a being who operated on a completely different plane of existence. To Omni-Man, Invincible, and the other heroes who had watched the first encounters unfold, Rimuru was no longer simply powerful. He was incomprehensible. Every decision he made was flawless, every movement precise, and every action calculated with an intelligence that dwarfed even the most methodical Viltrumite minds. To witness it was humbling. To oppose it, almost impossible. From above the cityscape, Rimuru's figure seemed almost serene, standing atop a high rise with a calmness that contrasted sharply with the chaos of the world around him. He wasn't just observing the planet. He was analyzing it, every detail feeding into Great Sage's calculations. Atmospheric pressure, structural integrity of buildings, energy signatures, social patterns, even the subtle shifts in Viltrumite behavior as they hovered in orbit, debating whether to strike or withdraw. The difference between Rimuru and the strongest beings on Earth wasn't in raw strength. It was in control. Where Omni-Man relied on overwhelming force, Rimuru relied on precision, adaptation, and foresight. The heroes felt it instantly. Adam Eve's manipulations of matter, Robot's technological genius, and even Invincible's superhuman speed all seemed almost trivial in the presence of Rimuru. Each attack that would normally require coordination and effort was effortlessly countered, neutralized, or redirected by Rimuru without aggression. Collapsing buildings stabilized mid-fall. Falling debris was absorbed or redirected. Shockwaves and destructive energy dissipated harmlessly. Every action was a lesson in efficiency, in control, in the terrifying potential of a being who had mastered not just combat, but the management of entire systems in real time. Even Omni-Man struggled to reconcile what he saw with his understanding of power. A Viltrumite could conquer a planet, yes, but Rimuru didn't just stop threats. He prevented them entirely. Each engagement wasn't a contest of strength. It was a rewrite of reality's rules. Where Viltrumites trained their entire lives to dominate through physical superiority, Rimuru dominated by anticipating every move, neutralizing every consequence, and reshaping the battlefield to serve a single goal: minimizing chaos and preserving life. To Nolan, the realization was staggering. Rimuru's approach wasn't brute force, it was godlike efficiency, and it left every hero and enemy alike questioning what it meant to be powerful. The first large-scale demonstration came when a Viltrumite strike force descended on a coastal city, intent on testing the limits of both Earth's defenders and Rimuru himself. Mark and his allies rushed to intercept, but Rimuru arrived first, not with aggression, but with precision. The ocean itself seemed to obey him, as tidal forces and localized gravitational fields were subtly adjusted to absorb the impact of the Viltrumites' arrival. Buildings that should have been destroyed remained intact. Streets that should have been flattened stayed safe, and civilians who should have perished were unharmed. The Viltrumites attacked relentlessly, but Rimuru's movements neutralized their efforts before a single blow landed. Even Invincible found himself suspended in awe, realizing that Rimuru's power wasn't measured in punches, speed, or durability. It was measured in the ability to enforce outcomes that no one else could touch. As the battle escalated, the Viltrumites attempted coordination on an unprecedented scale. They launched synchronized attacks designed to overwhelm any single opponent. Rimuru responded seamlessly, adjusting environmental variables, redirecting momentum, and neutralizing attacks in ways that were both invisible and immediate. Every attempt to corner him, every strategy to exploit a perceived weakness, failed before it could even begin. He was no longer a participant in the battle. He was the battlefield itself. The Viltrumites realized with dawning terror that they weren't just fighting him. They were trapped within the parameters he defined. Earth's heroes observed, taking in every move. Adam Eve whispered to Robot, He's not just strong. He's controlling everything. Mark couldn't argue. Each Viltrumite strike fizzled harmlessly. Buildings remained intact. Civilians were untouched. The young hero had faced unimaginable threats before, yet nothing prepared him for a being whose power transcended simple combat. Rimuru was not just a protector. He was a force that reshaped reality in real time, a godlike presence whose intelligence and adaptability made conventional measures of strength almost meaningless. Even Omni-Man, whose lifetime of conquest had forged a mindset of absolute confidence, recognized the unassailable truth. Rimuru Tempest was operating on a level beyond physical dominance. He wasn't reacting. He was preempting. Every threat that could arise, every strategy the Viltrumites might employ, had already been accounted for and neutralized. The notion of engaging him on their terms, of testing strength against strength, was rendered irrelevant. Rimuru's power was absolute, not because he crushed his enemies, but because he controlled the very structure of conflict itself. Rimuru's presence forced every hero to confront uncomfortable truths. Invincible had always measured his own growth against threats and limits, but Rimuru's mastery was different. It wasn't just about becoming stronger. It was about becoming complete. Adam Eve, Robot, and even the younger generation of heroes saw that conventional heroism, the kind that relied on reaction, improvisation, and sheer effort, might never be enough in a universe where beings like Rimuru could exist. And then came the moment that defined the scale of his power. A Viltrumite launched an unprecedented high-velocity strike, aiming to devastate an entire metropolitan area. Rimuru intervened, not with force, but with absolute control. Kinetic energy was redistributed harmlessly, the trajectory of the strike nullified, and the city remained intact, not a single civilian harmed. The operative, an elite Viltrumite accustomed to overwhelming worlds, hovered in disbelief, unable to comprehend how a single being could nullify centuries of combat expertise and raw power in a single moment. By the time the dust settled, the conclusion was unavoidable. Rimuru Tempest had demonstrated something no hero, no Viltrumite, and no observer could deny. He was not simply powerful, he was absolute. He had transcended conventional measures of strength. He had become, for all intents and purposes, a god among superhumans. And as Earth's defenders and its enemies alike processed the implications, one chilling truth emerged. Nothing in this universe, not brute force, not Viltrumite legacy, and not even the combined might of Earth's greatest heroes, could stand unchallenged before Rimuru Tempest. The Viltrumites, observing Rimuru in action, quickly realized that conventional tactics would be futile. Their centuries of training, their strategic coordination, their raw physical superiority, all of it was meaningless against someone who didn't just react, but anticipated, calculated, and neutralized threats before they could materialize. Every attempt to overwhelm him was instantly countered, not through brute force, but through subtle manipulation of the environment, energy flows, and even gravitational vectors. Buildings that should have crumbled under impact remained intact. Collapsing debris dissolved harmlessly before it could reach civilians. Every action by the Viltrumites became irrelevant the moment Rimuru perceived it. Omni-Man hovered closer, pride and caution battling in his expression. He had faced countless enemies and dominated entire planets. Yet Rimuru's presence challenged every assumption he had about combat and power. Nolan understood that he was no longer simply dealing with a strong adversary. He was facing a being whose mastery over outcomes transcended physicality. Rimuru didn't just neutralize attacks, he controlled the battlefield itself. Every move he made forced the Viltrumites to reconsider their approach, leaving them hesitant, cautious, and increasingly unnerved, a state that had never occurred in Viltrumite history. Invincible followed closely, astonishment evident in every line of his body. Mark had faced foes faster and stronger than anything Rimuru's scale suggested, yet here the rules were different. Rimuru's strength was irrelevant in the traditional sense. It wasn't about how fast he could move, how hard he could hit, or how much he could endure. It was about intelligence applied flawlessly, adaptability in real time, and an ability to reshape the battlefield to guarantee victory without unnecessary destruction. Every hero witnessing him learned that conventional heroism, speed, strength, reaction, was only a fraction of what mattered. The Viltrumites attempted a coordinated strike, aiming to overwhelm Rimuru by sheer numbers. They struck simultaneously from multiple angles, moving faster than sound, each attack designed to test his limits and force him into a conventional fight. Rimuru responded with precision and efficiency. Kinetic energy was redistributed harmlessly, trajectories were subtly altered, and the environmental structure absorbed the brunt of attacks. No lives were lost. No buildings truly fell. The Viltrumites' strike, meant to demonstrate dominance, instead became a lesson in futility. Even Omni-Man, watching every calculation, realized that Rimuru's mastery was beyond brute force. It was absolute control. Rimuru didn't stop there. He began demonstrating larger-scale interventions, anticipating not just the immediate attacks, but the potential consequences of escalation. Tsunamis caused by Viltrumite impact were diffused before reaching the coast. Collapsing skyscrapers were stabilized mid-fall. Falling debris redirected harmlessly. The Viltrumites realized with growing unease that Rimuru's control extended far beyond simple reaction. It encompassed the battlefield, the environment, and even the potential outcomes of their own choices. Every strategy they attempted became null before execution. Its heroes were left struggling to keep pace with him. Adam Eve's manipulations of matter, Robot's tactical ingenuity, and Invincible's sheer power all paled in comparison to the level of mastery Rimuru displayed. And yet Rimuru's goal wasn't domination. It wasn't conquest. He was demonstrating what could be achieved when intellect, foresight, and restraint were applied alongside power. It was both a lesson and a warning. Brute strength alone could not secure victory. Outcomes had to be controlled. Chaos neutralized and variables calculated, something Earth's defenders had never truly mastered before. The Viltrumites attempted a desperate maneuver, combining their physical power with coordinated flight patterns intended to crush Rimuru's defenses through sheer overwhelm. Rimuru, as if anticipating the plan moments before it was executed, adjusted the battlefield subtly. Shockwaves were absorbed harmlessly. Collapsing infrastructure was stabilized. Kinetic energy from the attacks was redirected to empty space, leaving the Viltrumites' strikes effectively impotent. Even Omni-Man strikes, capable of planetary devastation, were redirected without harm. Rimuru's mastery of the battlefield was now undeniable. He could enforce the flow of combat itself, dictating outcomes with precision and leaving no room for chance. By the end of this engagement, the Viltrumites were forced into retreat, not because they were physically beaten, but because Rimuru had rendered their offensive strategies meaningless. Every hero, every operative, and every observer had seen the same truth. Rimuru Tempest was no ordinary combatant. He was a force beyond conventional measurement, a god among superhumans. The battlefield itself bent to his will, every variable accounted for, every consequence neutralized, and every threat rendered irrelevant. Earth's defenders now faced an uncomfortable reality. The scale of Rimuru's mastery was beyond anything they had ever encountered. He was untouchable in ways they couldn't yet comprehend, and the Viltrumites, proud and unyielding, had encountered an adversary that forced them to reconsider everything they knew about power, strategy, and control. The Viltrumites hovered above, regrouping after repeated failed attempts to subdue Rimuru. Their pride was immense, their confidence forged over centuries of dominance. But for the first time, they felt the unsettling truth. Brute strength and centuries of conquest could not guarantee victory. Rimuru had not fought them conventionally. He had controlled the battlefield itself. Every strike, every maneuver, every calculated attack was met not with counterattack, but with outcome manipulation. Collapsing buildings stabilized mid-fall, falling debris was redirected harmlessly, and shockwaves dissipated before they could threaten civilians. The Viltrumites realized that fighting Rimuru was no longer a matter of power, it was a problem of logic. Omni-Man hovered tensely nearby, recognizing the depth of Rimuru's mastery. He had spent decades understanding Viltrumite power, strategy, and psychological manipulation, yet nothing in his experience prepared him for this. Rimuru's mastery wasn't raw strength, it was intelligence applied at speeds and precision beyond Viltrumite comprehension. Every possible attack they could launch had been anticipated, every variable accounted for, and every consequence neutralized before it could unfold. Nolan's pride bristled at the realization that his way, the Viltrumite way, was obsolete in the face of such calculated supremacy. Earth's heroes watched in stunned silence. Adam Eve's manipulations of matter, robot strategic ingenuity, and invincible speed and durability were formidable. Yet Rimuru's presence made their greatest feat seem almost trivial. He didn't just fight, he orchestrated outcomes. He neutralized threats without confrontation, protected civilians without effort, and redefined what it meant to hold power. Even when Viltrumites coordinated attacks in unprecedented formations, Rimuru adapted instantly, turning destructive energy into harmless dispersal and rendering their efforts ineffective. It wasn't just victory, it was dominance without conflict. A Viltrumite operative attempted a bold maneuver, launching at Rimuru with incredible speed and power, intending to isolate him and test his limits. Rimuru responded without aggression, altering gravitational fields and redirecting the trajectory of the attack so that the operative collided with a deserted area, unharmed yet unable to achieve his objective. Each subsequent strike was met the same way. Energy was diffused, kinetic force nullified, and the environment subtly adjusted to ensure that no civilian, no hero, and no operative was harmed. The Viltrumites' own confidence faltered as they realized that every tactic they had mastered over centuries was meaningless against a being who redefined the battlefield itself. Invincible could barely keep up. Mark understood that Rimuru's power wasn't measured in durability or speed. It was the ability to control outcomes. The young hero had faced overwhelming threats before, yet nothing prepared him for an entity whose mastery over reality itself was instantaneous and precise. Rimuru wasn't just a protector, he was a law of nature, a force that reshaped the environment and neutralized threats before they could manifest. Every hero witnessing him gained a lesson in the terrifying scale of his power. Conventional heroism based on reaction and improvisation was insufficient when facing a mind capable of calculating and enforcing outcomes with godlike precision. Omni-Man, frustrated and cautious, attempted to escalate, striking with full force in an attempt to provoke a reaction or test Rimuru's limits. Rimuru, as if anticipating the assault moments before it began, countered without confrontation. Kinetic energy from Nolan's attacks was subtly redirected, momentum dissipated harmlessly, and environmental factors adjusted to absorb the impact. Even the Viltrumites observed in shock, realizing that Rimuru didn't just defend, he nullified the entire concept of their assault. What should have been catastrophic was reduced to nothing. The demonstration of Rimuru's absolute control culminated when multiple Viltrumites coordinated a full-scale strike, attempting to overwhelm him through sheer force and synchronized attacks. Rimuru responded seamlessly, controlling the battlefield with surgical precision. Shockwaves and destructive energy were neutralized. Collapsing structures stabilized, and civilians remained untouched. Even Omni-Man's most destructive blows were rendered harmless. The Viltrumites, elite warriors bred for planetary domination, found themselves powerless, not because they were weak, but because the rules had changed. By the end of this engagement, Rimuru had not just survived. He had redefined what it meant to be powerful. Earth's defenders and the Viltrumites alike understood a chilling truth. Rimuru Tempest was operating on a level beyond strength, speed, or durability. He didn't fight in the conventional sense. He controlled outcomes. He neutralized threats before they occurred. He protected lives effortlessly. He reshaped reality, subtly yet completely, to ensure that chaos and destruction were irrelevant. Rimuru was not just a hero, not just a protector. He was a god among superhumans. As the Viltrumites retreated to reconsider their approach, Omni-Man's expression was a mixture of awe, frustration, and reluctant acknowledgement. Invincible and the rest of Earth's defenders were left grappling with a new reality. The scale of Rimuru's mastery was beyond comprehension. No brute force, no coordinated assault, no conventional strategy could challenge him. The battlefield itself bent to his will, every variable accounted for, every consequence neutralized. Rimuru Tempest had arrived, and with him, the very definition of power, strategy, and heroism had changed forever. The Viltrumites, elite warriors who had toppled civilizations and razed planets, hovered tensely above Earth, forced to confront a reality that defied their centuries of training. Rimuru's presence had reshaped the rules of engagement entirely. No longer could strength alone dictate outcomes. Every attack, every coordinated strike, every calculated maneuver the Viltrumites attempted was anticipated, neutralized, or redirected with near-invisible precision. It wasn't brute force, they were powerful, but it was useless against a being who could control the flow of battle itself, manipulating consequences before actions even fully unfolded. Omni-Man's jaw tightened as he observed. Pride and instinct warred within him. The Viltrumite way had always been clear. Dominate through strength, conquer through force, rule without compromise. But here was Rimuru, a being who neutralized power through intelligence, adaptability, and absolute foresight. Nolan struck again, testing Rimuru's limits with attacks capable of planetary devastation. The blows arrived at impossible speed, their impact theoretically sufficient to obliterate the city below. Yet Rimuru didn't even flinch. Kinetic energy was redirected into the air, shockwaves dissipated harmlessly, and structural damage was nullified before it could occur. The Viltrumite attack, devastating in theory, had no effect. Invincible and the other heroes watched, awestruck and unnerved. Mark had faced threats faster, stronger, and more brutal than anything Rimuru had confronted so far. But none could manipulate outcomes with this level of absolute precision. Every action Rimuru took was calculated, every variable considered, every consequence controlled. Buildings that should have fallen remained standing. Civilians who should have perished were untouched. Even the Viltrumites' most synchronized strikes were rendered irrelevant. Rimuru didn't just win. He made defeat impossible without ever raising a hand in offense. A Viltrumite operative attempted a desperate maneuver, combining speed, brute strength, and tactical coordination in an effort to break Rimuru's defenses. Rimuru's response was instantaneous. He altered gravity, redirected momentum, and manipulated the environment so that the attack collapsed harmlessly away from civilians and heroes alike. The operative, a veteran of countless planetary battles, was forced to hover mid-air, stunned, as every calculated strike was undone before it could land. He realized, as did the others, that conventional combat logic no longer applied. Rimuru's mastery transcended brute strength. It was absolute control, a godlike ability to enforce outcomes rather than react to threats. Omni-Man strikes escalated further, combining raw power with tactical aggression. Yet Rimuru neutralized them seamlessly. Shockwaves fizzled into harmless dispersal, debris stabilized midair, and every potential casualty was prevented. Even multiple Viltrumites attacking simultaneously could not overwhelm him. Where they relied on raw force and instinct, Rimuru relied on foresight, adaptability, and environmental manipulation. Earth's heroes were left witnessing an almost impossible reality, a being whose power was measured not in destruction, but in control, precision, and the absolute enforcement of desired outcomes. The Viltrumites' retreat was tactical, not out of defeat, but out of recognition. They were elite warriors trained to dominate, yet Rimuru had shown them something unprecedented. A force that didn't just resist, they couldn't even touch it conventionally. Every strike, every maneuver, every strategy they had mastered for generations was neutralized effortlessly. The battlefield itself bent to Rimuru's will, and with it, the Viltrumites' confidence cracked for the first time in recorded history. Invincible floated beside Rimuru, voice tight with awe and disbelief. "I've fought threats like this before, but this isn't just power. It's control. It's absolute." Rimuru's calm response was simple, almost serene. Power is only meaningful when it can protect and preserve. Everything else is chaos. Adam Eve, Robot, and the other heroes exchanged glances, realizing that their understanding of strength and heroism had been irrevocably changed. By the time the engagement ended, the scale of Rimuru's dominance was undeniable. He had faced multiple Viltrumites, neutralized their most coordinated attacks, protected civilians, and redefined the concept of power. Earth's heroes and its greatest threats had seen something that challenged the very nature of combat, strategy, and survival. Rimuru Tempest was not just a superhuman, he was a god among superhumans. Every action he took demonstrated that the battlefield, outcomes, and reality itself could be controlled with intellect, precision, and foresight that transcended conventional limits. The Viltrumites, elite and prideful as they were, had been forced into a temporary withdrawal. Omni-Man's respect, grudging and tinged with frustration, was earned in those moments. Invincible and the rest of Earth's defenders were left with a sobering understanding. Rimuru wasn't merely a hero nor just a protector. He was a being whose mastery over life, combat, and consequence placed him in an entirely different echelon. And as Earth's heroes and Viltrumites alike processed the implications, one chilling realization emerged. Rimuru Tempest had arrived, and the universe itself would never be the same. Before we dive in, here's a question for you. How do you think Earth's heroes would react if a being beyond their comprehension appeared in their world? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm curious to see how far your imagination can stretch. Now picture this. Rimuru Tempest, the ever-calculating, endlessly adaptive Demon Lord, has fully arrived in the invincible universe. Not as a visitor, not as a bystander, but as a force rewriting the rules of existence itself. For Earth's defenders, for the Viltrumites, and even for the unsuspecting populace below, his arrival signals a collision of two universes in a way that no one could have anticipated. A world accustomed to superheroes measuring strength against strength is about to face a being whose power isn't just physical. It's absolute, conceptual, and godlike. The first sign that Rimuru's presence would change everything comes in the form of subtle alterations to the battlefield. Cities that had endured previous Viltrumite skirmishes now appear almost untouched. Yet closer observation reveals the subtle fingerprints of Rimuru's control. Gravitational vectors shifted to prevent destruction, energy flows redirected to avoid collateral damage, and structural integrity reinforced in ways that defy conventional engineering. Earth's heroes and villains alike feel it instinctively. Something has arrived that doesn't just fight. It dominates the rules that govern combat. This is not an opponent to be beaten. This is a reality to be reckoned with. Omni-Man hovers tensely above, his pride and instincts bristling against the invisible authority Rimuru wields. Nolan has faced cosmic forces, planetary threats, and the full might of Viltrumite legacies, yet the presence of Rimuru evokes a disquiet he hasn't felt in decades. This isn't about speed, durability, or raw power. It's about control over outcomes, foresight that exceeds the limits of perception, and an ability to enforce consequences before action even begins. Rimuru is a living system, processing possibilities and applying solutions instantly. To Nolan and to the Viltrumites observing from orbit, this is nothing short of godlike. Earth's heroes, too, are caught in awe and trepidation. Invincible, Adam, Eve, Robot, and the rest understand the stakes immediately. They've seen Rimuru manipulate the battlefield, neutralize attacks, and protect civilians with a fluidity that makes heroics they've relied on seem almost quaint. Adam, Eve whispers, barely audible. He's not just strong, he's everything at once. And she's right. Rimuru's arrival transforms the battlefield into a calculated network, where every variable is considered and every potential danger is preemptively neutralized. What they see isn't just a hero, it's a being whose intelligence, foresight, and adaptability elevate him far beyond mortal comprehension. The Viltrumites, elite warriors bred for centuries to conquer and dominate, are the first to attempt a direct engagement. They descend in synchronized formation, moving at speeds that bend perception. Their intent clear: test, overwhelm, dominate. But Rimuru's presence isn't just reactive, it's proactive. Kinetic energy is subtly redistributed, attack vectors altered mid-flight, and gravitational anomalies manipulate trajectories without a single punch thrown. Buildings remain intact, civilians safe, and every strike designed to assert dominance fails before it lands. The Viltrumites begin to realize that the laws they have relied on for millennia do not apply here. A being that can control outcomes, manipulate forces invisibly, and neutralize threats conceptually is something their training cannot overcome. Invincible steps forward, attempting to engage the Viltrumites as he has countless times before, but even his enhanced speed and strength are now measured against a different standard. Rimuru moves beside him, not to dominate him, but to orchestrate the battlefield, guiding energy, momentum, and spatial dynamics with imperceptible precision. Mark realizes that Rimuru doesn't fight in the conventional sense. He reframes combat itself. Every heroic maneuver Invincible has learned is both respected and exceeded, teaching him in real time what it means to survive in a conflict where intellect, adaptability, and foresight define power more than muscle or speed ever could. Omni-Man attempts to assert control, pressing attacks with the raw aggression and decisiveness of a Viltrumite, striking with planetary-level force. Rimuru intercepts not with counterattack, but with subtle manipulations of physics and energy. Shockwaves dissipate harmlessly. Collapsing infrastructure is stabilized mid-air. Even multiple Viltrumites coordinating attacks simultaneously find their efforts neutralized without Rimuru ever directly engaging. The city below is unharmed. Civilians remain oblivious to the magnitude of power hovering above them. Every action Rimuru takes reinforces one unshakable truth. He is not simply a superhuman. He is a god among superhumans, a demon lord whose intelligence and control exceed the very limits of the invincible universe. The Viltrumites, elite and relentless as they are, find themselves forced to retreat momentarily, not out of weakness, but in recognition that they cannot overcome a being who can manipulate not just combat, but reality's rules themselves. Nolan's pride bristles, yet he is forced to respect what he sees. A force so absolute that conventional measures of strength are meaningless. Rimuru doesn't merely survive. He enforces outcomes, reshapes the battlefield, and neutralizes threats before they can manifest. Every hero witnessing this understands that a new standard of power has arrived, one that challenges everything they thought they knew about strength, combat, and survival. Even as the dust settles, Rimuru doesn't pause. His gaze sweeps across the horizon, anticipating threats not yet visible, calculating outcomes not yet realized, and preparing the battlefield for the inevitable escalation to come. Earth's defenders watch, realizing that this is only the beginning. The Demon Lord from another universe has arrived, and the stakes have never been higher. The Viltrumites may return, stronger and more coordinated than before, but Rimuru Tempest has already demonstrated a chilling truth. No force, no strategy, and no legacy of domination can challenge his absolute control. The stage is set. The ultimate confrontation is imminent. The Viltrumites regrouped far above the city, their pride intact but shaken. They had faced empires, annihilated planets, and crushed entire civilizations without hesitation. Yet here was Rimuru, a single being whose presence forced them to reconsider everything they thought they knew about combat and power. Each operative recalculated, anticipating Rimuru's next move, but every possible strategy had already been accounted for, every attack preemptively neutralized. It wasn't just strength, it was an intelligence, a foresight, and a control that exceeded anything the Viltrumites had encountered. To oppose him in the conventional sense was meaningless. Omni-Man hovered tensely, fists clenched and eyes narrowed, as he observed the subtle shifts in the battlefield orchestrated by Rimuru. The city beneath them was intact, civilians safe, and yet the environment was subtly altered to ensure every potential attack vector was accounted for. Even without striking, Rimuru dominated the engagement. He was not reacting. He was enforcing outcomes, bending the very dynamics of combat to his will. Every energy wave, every trajectory, every gravitational fluctuation was manipulated in real time to neutralize the Viltrumites' advantage, rendering their centuries of experience and training ineffective. Invincible moved alongside Rimuru, trying to process what he was seeing. Mark's enhanced speed and strength were formidable, but they were measured against an entirely different standard here. Rimuru's mastery wasn't about who could hit harder or move faster. It was about controlling the battlefield itself, predicting every possible threat and neutralizing it before it could manifest. Buildings that should have been pulverized remained intact. Debris that should have caused mass destruction was harmlessly redirected. Shockwaves fizzled. Even elite Viltrumites attacking in perfect coordination were left frustrated and confused, as their attacks were nullified before impact. Rimuru's interventions escalated in precision and scale. A Viltrumite operative attempted a high-speed assault, aiming to strike the city's heart. Rimuru responded instantaneously. Gravitational vectors subtly adjusted to redirect momentum. Kinetic energy dissipated harmlessly, and the operative's strike collided with empty air. Another Viltrumite attempted to flank Rimuru from above, coordinating with a ground-level assault. Without a single offensive motion, Rimuru neutralized both attacks simultaneously. The Viltrumites began to understand the terrifying magnitude of what they faced. This was not combat in any form they had experienced. This was absolute control, an orchestration of events that left them powerless. Earth's heroes observed, their minds struggling to grasp the scale of Rimuru's dominance. Adam Eve whispered to Robot, "I've never seen anything like this. He's not just a hero, he's controlling everything at once." Mark nodded, jaw tight. It's like fighting him isn't about hitting or blocking. It's about surviving a reality he's already calculated. Rimuru, meanwhile, remained calm and composed, analyzing each Viltrumite's behavior, predicting maneuvers, and adjusting the battlefield with the precision of a master tactician. His goal wasn't destruction, it was control. Every civilian remained safe, every potential casualty averted, every threat accounted for. The Viltrumites tried desperate maneuvers, attempting to combine speed, strength, and tactical aggression to overwhelm Rimuru's calculations. But he was always several steps ahead. Kinetic energy was redistributed harmlessly, collapsing structures were stabilized mid-fall, and environmental factors subtly neutralized every threat. The once feared Viltrumites found themselves ineffective against a being who not only matched their power, but reshaped reality to render that power irrelevant. Even Omni-Man's most forceful strikes were rerouted, absorbed, and neutralized without harm. Rimuru's mastery was total. He didn't just fight. He defined the outcome of combat itself. By the time the engagement reached its peak, Rimuru had achieved something extraordinary. The Viltrumites, elite warriors who had crushed entire civilizations, were forced to retreat, not because they had been physically defeated, but because their efforts were rendered meaningless in the face of Rimuru's control. Earth's defenders witnessed a chilling truth. Rimuru Tempest was not merely a powerful entity. He was a god among superhumans. Every strike he deflected, every threat he neutralized, every outcome he controlled reinforced the same lesson. Conventional heroics, raw strength, and even Viltrumite legacy were insignificant against a being capable of absolute foresight and battlefield orchestration. Even as Rimuru allowed the Viltrumites to retreat, his gaze swept across the horizon. Every potential threat had been anticipated, every consequence is calculated, every variable is under control. He wasn't simply a participant in this universe, he was a force capable of rewriting its rules. Earth's heroes realized that the ultimate confrontation wasn't about who could punch harder or fly faster. It was about survival in a reality Rimuru had already mastered, and where conventional strength was almost irrelevant. The stage was set. The final battle, the ultimate clash between Viltrumite legacy, Earth's defenders, and a demon lord from another universe, was imminent. The Viltrumites' retreat was temporary, a pause born from confusion, not defeat. They hovered above, elite warriors of a legacy built on conquest and domination, yet forced to reassess what they had faced. Rimuru Tempest had not engaged them in conventional combat, yet he had dominated every strike, every maneuver, and every conceivable tactic they had tried. He had neutralized planetary-level attacks with subtle manipulations of physics and energy, safeguarded entire cities without a visible effort, and made even coordinated strikes from multiple Viltrumites seem inconsequential. The Viltrumites began to recognize the horrifying reality. Their centuries of expertise, their raw power, and their strategic genius were irrelevant against a being who could control the battlefield itself. Omni-Man's pride bristled as he observed Rimuru's control. The young hero inside him, the invincible we all know, felt a mix of awe and unease. Nolan had faced threats capable of destroying worlds, yet Rimuru's mastery was different. It was not raw power that defined him. It was absolute foresight, adaptability, and the ability to enforce outcomes before anyone could act. Every energy wave, every trajectory, every subtle environmental factor was manipulated with near-perfect precision. The Viltrumites, used to domination and victory through force, were left grasping at possibilities they could no longer control. Earth's heroes watched in stunned silence. Adam Eve, robot and invincible, realized that Rimuru's presence redefined the very notion of power. Mark's enhanced speed, strength, and combat experience were impressive, yet Rimuru operated on a scale that rendered conventional abilities almost moot. Buildings that should have fallen remained intact, debris redirected harmlessly, and shockwaves dissipated without harming anyone. Even the most synchronized Viltrumite assaults were neutralized before they could land. Rimuru's intervention wasn't aggressive. It was decisive, precise, and godlike. The city remained safe. the civilians unharmed. And yet the Viltrumites' attacks had been rendered meaningless. Rimuru's subtle manipulations became more pronounced as the engagement escalated. A Viltrumite operative attempted a rapid, high-velocity assault on the city's heart. Rimuru responded with imperceptible precision, redirecting kinetic energy, adjusting gravity vectors, and stabilizing surrounding structures. The attack that should have obliterated everything was dissipated harmlessly. Another operative tried to flank Rimuru, coordinating with ground-level attacks. Both maneuvers were neutralized simultaneously without any visible motion from Rimuru. Every Viltrumite realized with growing unease that this was no longer a conventional battle. Rimuru had become the very environment itself, controlling outcomes before they could unfold. Invincible moved alongside Rimuru, trying to assess the scale of his abilities. "He doesn't fight like anyone I've ever faced," Mark muttered, his voice tight. "He's everywhere at once, and nothing we do seems to matter." Adam Eve nodded, still processing the sheer precision of Rimuru's interventions. Every hero present witnessed a force that transcended strength, speed, and endurance. Rimuru's mastery wasn't about defeating opponents through force. It was about making conflict irrelevant. Every strike deflected, every consequence neutralized, and every attack predicted reinforced a single unshakable truth. Rimuru Tempest was absolute. Omni-Man, frustrated yet respectful, launched a direct assault, testing Rimuru's limits with a combination of Viltrumite speed, strength, and tactical aggression. Rimuru countered, not with retaliation, but with subtle adjustments to physics and energy. Collapsing buildings stabilized mid-air. Shockwaves were dissipated. Kinetic energy redirected. Even multiple Viltrumites attacking in perfect coordination were neutralized without Rimuru ever engaging offensively. The battlefield itself bent to his will, and the Viltrumites had no choice but to recognize that conventional combat could never overcome him. By now, Rimuru's dominance had escalated to a point that even the most experienced observers could not ignore. The Viltrumites' retreat was strategic. They were not defeated, but they understood that continuing conventional assaults was futile. Omni-Man's respect for Rimuru's abilities grew, tinged with frustration at his own limitations. Invincible and the other Earth defenders comprehended a chilling reality. Rimuru Tempest had become a godlike presence, a demon lord whose mastery of outcomes and control of the battlefield was absolute. No matter the threat, no matter the legacy of conquest, Rimuru had established supremacy not through aggression, but through flawless foresight, adaptability, and enforcement of consequences. The stage was set for the ultimate confrontation. Rimuru's gaze swept across the horizon, calculating, anticipating, preparing for the escalation that would inevitably come. Every possible threat had been accounted for. Every outcome was controlled. Every variable is neutralized. The Viltrumites, Earth's defenders, and the entire world now faced an undeniable truth. Rimuru Tempest was not merely a hero or a superhuman. He was a demon lord from another universe, a god among superhumans, and the ultimate arbiter of conflict. As the universe braced for the next escalation, one fact was undeniable. No force, no strategy, and no legacy of power could challenge the absolute mastery Rimuru had already demonstrated. The Viltrumites returned, this time with renewed coordination and a plan designed to overwhelm Rimuru through sheer numbers and raw force. They descended in perfect formation, elite warriors whose pride and experience had conquered countless worlds. But Rimuru's presence was already dictating the flow of the battlefield. He didn't just react, he controlled. Gravity subtly shifted to redirect attacks, energy from impact dispersed harmlessly, and collapsing structures stabilized mid-fall. Every strike, every maneuver the Viltrumites attempted was neutralized before it could threaten civilians or Earth's defenders. Omni-Man surged forward, striking with the full power of a Viltrumite at its peak. Shockwaves radiated across the city, but Rimuru intercepted not with a punch or energy blast, but with subtle manipulations that rerouted momentum and dissipated destructive force. Buildings that should have crumbled remained intact. Civilians remained safe. Even coordinated strikes from multiple Viltrumites converged into harmless collisions, as Rimuru's influence over the battlefield became absolute. Every hero watching realized the same terrifying truth. Rimuru Tempest was not just powerful, he was untouchable in a way that transcended conventional understanding. Invincible and Adam Eve struggled to keep pace. Mark's superhuman speed and strength, honed against the universe's deadliest threats, were now irrelevant compared to a being capable of predicting and neutralizing outcomes before they could even occur. Adam Eve's matter manipulation and Robot's technological ingenuity were no longer sufficient to challenge Rimuru's control. The battlefield itself had become a living extension of his will. Every attack was accounted for, every danger anticipated, every consequence is preemptively neutralized. The Viltrumites, proud and relentless, realized that their centuries of dominance meant nothing here. Rimuru's mastery escalated further. A group of Viltrumites attempted a synchronized strike, combining speed, strength, and precision attacks aimed at the city center. Rimuru responded instantly, subtly altering gravitational vectors, redistributing kinetic energy, and redirecting attacks in midair. The strikes that should have obliterated everything were rendered meaningless. Even Omni-Man, striking with planetary-level force, found his attacks neutralized without Rimuru ever engaging offensively. It wasn't combat in the conventional sense. It was enforcement of outcomes, a demonstration that intelligence, foresight, and absolute control surpassed strength in every conceivable way. The Viltrumites hovered, frustrated, their confidence faltering. They had trained to dominate worlds, yet here they faced a being who rewrote the rules of engagement entirely. Even their best strategies were ineffective. Their legacy of conquest provided no advantage. Rimuru had demonstrated that power could be redefined. Victory was not about speed or strength, but about anticipating and controlling every variable. Omni-Man, usually unstoppable and relentless, acknowledged the truth with a mixture of awe, frustration, and respect. Rimuru had surpassed what they all considered the limits of strength and strategy. Earth's defenders now understood the magnitude of Rimuru's presence. Invincible's jaw tightened. This isn't just fighting. He's everywhere at once, controlling outcomes we can't even perceive. Adam Eve nodded grimly, and Robot's calculations confirmed what they feared. Rimuru's interventions were instantaneous, flawless, and beyond any known measure of power. Every threat that had existed, every plan that could have succeeded, was neutralized before it began. Rimuru wasn't just a hero or a protector. He was a force of nature, a demon lord whose control transcended every limit. Finally, the Viltrumites withdrew, recognizing that conventional combat was futile. Rimuru had established supremacy not through brute force, but through mastery of the battlefield, intelligence, and absolute control over outcomes. Omni-Man and Invincible hovered, their expressions a mixture of respect and awe, as Rimuru surveyed the horizon. Earth was safe, yet the encounter left a clear message. Rimuru Tempest had arrived, and his presence changed everything. No force, no strategy, no legacy of conquest could challenge a being who controlled not just combat, but the very rules of reality itself. And so the stage was set for what might come next. Rimuru had proven himself unmatched, a god among superhumans, a demon lord in a universe unprepared for his scale of intelligence and power. The Viltrumites had retreated, but the encounter had left an indelible mark. Earth's defenders had witnessed a being whose abilities could redefine heroism, strength, and survival. From the skies, Rimuru gazed upon the world he had quietly protected, a serene calm in his eyes. The threat had been neutralized, but the possibilities were endless. And as the heroes and villains alike processed what they had seen, one truth became undeniable. The invincible universe had met a force unlike any other, a demon lord whose mastery of combat, reality, and consequence was absolute. Rimuru Tempest had arrived, and the universe would never be the same. So what do you think would happen if Rimuru truly stayed in the Invincible universe? Would he ally with Earth's heroes, or rewrite the entire balance of power entirely on his own? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I love reading your theories. And if you enjoyed this multiverse collision, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss our next What If scenario. The multiverse is vast, and with Rimuru around, anything is possible.